I'm going to go along at a rapid clip. I've got a lot of information here, so here we go. The SSE is no stranger to the subject of UFOs. Unidentified aerial phenomena is just a new acronym for UFOs. Back a couple of decades ago, Peter Sturrock, one of our founding members of SSE, arranged with Rockefeller to hold a week-long workshop at the Rockefeller residence, where we brought in the best of the UFO researchers and then a panel of independent experts and had a week-long discussion of physical evidence related to UFO objects, of which there's a significant amount of data. And Lawrence Rockefeller hosted the whole thing. It was a wonderful meeting. Eventually, after publishing in the SSE Journal, Peter Sturrock put together a book, The UFO Enigma, and it is still one of the best books you can find out there to take a look at what are the physical aspects of UFOs that researchers have uncovered. However, of course, the government also is no stranger to the UFO phenomena. Anyone who follows the field would be familiar with Project Sign, Grudge, and Blue Book. But in 1969, the Condon Committee shut it all down and said, really, we don't need to be involved in this area anymore. We're not learning anything. We're not getting anywhere. It's not clear that this is a significant area. And so for the average person on the street, that's when it all kind of ended, at least serious government interest. In fact, that's not true. The very memo that shut down Blue Book, written by General Bolender, had as part of its language, reports of UFOs which could affect national security would continue to be handled through the standard Air Force procedures designed for this purpose. Nonetheless, as far as the public was concerned, that was it. I mean, even the Air Force Public Affairs Office put out circulars all the time in response to questions saying, no, well, we gave this up in 1969. What, in fact, did occur was that there were programs going on behind the scenes anyway, as required by the Bolender Memo. Now, most people didn't know about these programs. They weren't advertised. They weren't responded to. FOA requests usually went dry. But that all changed last December when the New York Times published a front page story on how there was this program investigating this area, Advanced Aerospace Threat Identification Program. It was deeply buried, but New York Times had good sources, and they came up with information about the program, and so there's been a lot of publicity about it. Since the New York Times broke the story, Washington Post, CNN, Fox News, it's been picked up all over the place. And one of the reasons why it's attracted attention at this point are the quality of the sources going public. Ex-Senate Majority Leader Harry Reid is the one who initiated the program. Top-rated F-18 pilots who encountered advanced aerospace vehicles at close range were permitted to come forward and tell their stories, which up till now they hadn't because they didn't want to lose their flight status by reporting what they had found, at least publicly. And a number of significant Department of Defense and intelligence community officials have come forward to talk about the reality of this phenomena and the fact that there were programs going on. The program was nicknamed Advanced Aerospace Threat Identification Program, AATIP. People have had trouble trying to get documents out of the Pentagon by saying they want all documents in AATIP, and they have a hard time because that wasn't actually the name of the program. The top name there is the actual name of the program, but AATIP was the nickname that it went by. It began in June of 2007. Defense Intelligence Agency was concerned about the fact that obvious observation had shown that advanced aerospace vehicles, crafts or drones of unknown origin, were flying all over the United States, over waters, in fact, globally is the case. And so a congressional budget was approved to address the issue behind the scenes. Senate Majority Leader Harry Reid from Nevada was the one who was the initiator of the program, joined by Senator Inouye and Senator Stevens. These are the people who generally approve programs that were in the black, under high security, behind the scenes, and so they set up this program. Senator Reid has not walked this back since all the news came out. He's been very forthright and given a number of interviews. This particular statement sort of captures it all. We don't know the answers, but we have plenty of evidence to support the questions. This is about science and national security. If America doesn't take a lead answering these questions, others will. Well, there's a twofold nature of the threat. First of all, you've got these advanced aerospace vehicles flying around that we don't know where they come from, who's driving them, what the intent is, possibly off-world even. But the future threat was actually, as far as the Department of Defense went, and the intelligence community, one of the greater concerns. What happens if potential adversaries achieve significant breakthroughs by getting hold of advanced technology, either based on their study of the phenomena or from sensor data or crash retrieved materials? Then that could provide a problem for the United States in the sense of threat. And there's reason to be concerned about that. This is a document in the program we dug up out of the Soviet Union. It's a very thick document. It shows that the Soviet Union had a massive program also trying to get to the root of all of this. And in this document, a number of research institutes and military institutes are listed. And of course, they had the same concerns we did. Is there a threat from the phenomena? Or might the Americans make headway before us, and that be a threat? Just to give you an idea of what's being observed, which many of people have seen because it's been in the news a lot lately. Back in November of 2004, a Nimitz carrier group was out on patrol off of San Diego, and on several occasions, an advanced aerospace vehicle would descend rapidly from 60,000 feet to 50 feet in seconds, and then hover, and then take off like a bullet. When it first happened, and it happened over a number of weeks, actually, two F-18, I'll talk about two F-18 pilots were vectored onto the site where they were being observed by the radars to investigate. And what they saw was what they called a tic-tac craft. Solid white, smooth, no edges, about 46 feet in length, uniformly colored, no nacelles, pylons, or wings. The F-18s could not obtain lock with their radars because they were stealthy, but forward-looking infrared radar could pick them up to some degree based on their heat signatures. And the advanced aerospace vehicle appeared to demonstrate advanced acceleration, aerodynamic, and propulsion capability beyond anything that we knew existed on the planet. I'm going to play a FLIR video that many of you may have seen. I've got sound with the video. Do you have?
Dude, that is a fucking drone, bro. There's a whole fleet of them. Look on the ASA. My gosh. They're all going against the wind. The wind's 120 knots from the west. The whole thing, dude. That's not our LNS though, is it? It's not. It is an LNS, dude. Well, the FLIR's look at that thing. It's rotated.
I want to play it one more time.
Dude, that is a fucking drone, bro. There's a whole fleet of them. Look on the ASA. My gosh. They're all going against the wind. The wind's 120 knots from the west. Look at that thing, dude. That's not our LNS though, is it? It's not. That is our LNS, dude. Well, if there's a... Look at that thing. It's rotated.
Now you might ask yourself, well, like, what can you prove from a videotape? I mean, you can see videotapes all over the internet and so on. But this was data fusion. There are gun camera tapes, there are these videotapes from the pilots, voice recordings, data link recordings from Aegis and many other military platforms, expert witnesses. So in fact, the data density, and this is what's changed the field a lot, our detection capability has gotten so advanced that we're losing our inability to see exactly what's going on. The FLIR displays were recorded. There are detailed debriefs of the pilots. In that original New York Times article, you can see a page-long debrief of Dave Fravor. Oops. Key assessments. The Advanced Aerospace Vehicle is no known air vehicle in the inventory of the U.S. or a foreign nation, as far as we can tell. Low observable characteristics, they're stealthy. They exhibit advanced aerodynamic performance that we can't imagine how they do it. And recognize that these are infrared tapes from the pilots, so if there was some kind of hot propulsion gases coming out the back, you would have seen it, but we don't see that. They had the advanced capability to remain stationary and then take off like a shot. Dave Fravor says it was like somebody suddenly shot a bullet. So, how to respond to this? The Defense Intelligence Agency put out a broad area announcement. In fact, it was unclassified. They wanted to evaluate 12 potential threat areas with regard to these advanced aerospace vehicles. There's a list of them. Exactly what you would think you'd want to know: lift, propulsion, signature reduction, human effects, and so on. Now, it turned out that any aerospace corporation could apply, could send in a proposal. DIA chose Bigelow Aerospace as a contractor to address the threat. Now, there's been buzz on the internet about, okay, well, Senator Reid came from Nevada, and Bigelow Aerospace is in Nevada, so wasn't this just some sweetheart deal? In fact, that's not the case. It was a broad area announcement. Anybody could go for it. Bigelow was actually a good choice. He'd spent a lot of his own money because he was interested in this area up to this point, investigating the phenomena, and he had the best proposal. And so he was tasked, and so he set up a special organization called Bigelow Aerospace Advanced Space Studies, so we call it BASS, to do all the things you'd expect a program like this to do. Well, BASS contacted me at EarthTech International to collaborate as a subcontractor, and I agreed to do that. Okay, what did I address as a subcontractor? Well, one of the critical issues is that there's so much high-level security and compartmentalization in this subject area, and there's a lot of it. It's difficult for contractors to obtain expert opinions on advanced technologies because they would expose why they were interested. So I acted as a surrogate. I was contracted to commission mostly unclassified white papers from experts around the globe, where their particular aerospace-related subject areas would be in 2050 as like a general survey of aerospace futures. I decided this would be the best way to get the best knowledge we had across many technologies without actually exposing why we wanted to know. So I let out 38 contracts over a 2-year period. I'll show you what the studies were on. You can read them there. Positron aerospace propulsion, IEC fusion is a compact energy source, warp drive, dark energy, extra dimensions, metallic glasses for aerospace use, really cutting edge kinds of things. Here's some more of the papers that I commissioned: negative mass propulsion, anti-gravity for aerospace applications, and so on. Programmable matter, invisibility cloaking. These are just the kind of things that we needed to have maximum technical input from the best people around the globe. And so that's what we did. That's what I did. Now, we could wait. We told these people they could publish their reports in physics journals and engineering journals, but of course, the contractors didn't want to wait for that. So the Defense Intelligence Agency bundled up these 38 papers and put them out as Defense Intelligence reference documents posted on a JWIX server that anyone in the government or contractors could get access to. By and large, they have not been released to the public yet. A couple have leaked out. So let me give you an example of, well, how does this stuff help people who are chasing these really difficult problems? I'm choosing one here: metamaterials for aerospace use. I'd love to talk about really fancy materials, but they're classified. However, there's a lot of materials that have been picked up or provided even in the public domain. I'm going to give an example because it shows exactly what the structure is for how to deal with this. This is an open source sample. It was sent anonymously to talk show host Art Bell. The fellow claimed to be in the military. He said that this sample was picked up in a crash retrieval, and so he sent it by email. So what does that mean? Chain of custody? Non-existent. Provenance? Questionable. Could be a hoax. Could be some slag off of some foundry floor or whatever. However, it was an unusual sample. So we decided to take a look at it. It was a multi-layered bismuth and magnesium sample. Bismuth layers less than a human hair. Magnesium samples about 10 times the size of a human hair. Supposedly picked up in the crash retrieval of an advanced aerospace vehicle. Looks like it's been in a crash. The white lines are the bismuth. The darker areas are the magnesium separations. So the question was, what about this material? So naturally, we looked in all of the national labs. We talked to metallurgists. We combed the entire structure of published papers. Nowhere could we find any evidence that anybody ever made one of these. Secondly, some attempts were made to try to reproduce this material, but they couldn't get the bismuth and magnesium layers to bond. Thirdly, when we talked to people who in the materials field who should know, they said, we don't know why anybody would want to make anything like this. It's not obvious that it has any function. Well, years later, decades later actually, finally our own science moves along. We move into an area called metamaterials, and it turns out that exactly this combination of materials at exactly those dimensions turn out to be an excellent microscopic waveguide for very high frequency electromagnetic radiation, terahertz frequencies. So the wavelength is 60 microns, which is pretty small size, but it turns out that because of the metamaterial aspect of this material, those bismuth layers that act as waveguides can be 1/20th the size of the wavelength, and usually when you make a waveguide, it's got to be about the size of the wavelength. So in fact, this turned out to be a material that would propagate sub-wavelength waveguide effects. Why somebody wants to do that, we still don't know the answer to that. But anyway, it was amazing that we've gone through this, and this is the kind of structure we go through a lot. You get a material sample with unusual characteristics to be evaluated. The method of manufacture is difficult to assess or reproduce. The purpose of the function is not readily apparent, as with our sample here. And then as our own technical knowledge moves forward, we finally see a possible purpose or function comes to light. That sequence is repeated over and over in this particular area. I'll pick a second one here for the engineers and physicists in the crowd, probably be more interesting. Space-time metric engineering, this happened to be the paper that I myself provided. One of the questions is, can the reported anomalous observables of these advanced aerospace vehicles be accounted for on the basis of known physics? I mean, you hear people describing craft taking right-angled turns at high speeds and other things with the hovering and rapid acceleration and so on, as if the craft didn't have any inertial mass. Well, it turns out, although general relativity, Einstein's general relativity is usually used in astrophysical applications and gravity studies and so on, you can look at it from an engineering standpoint. So if you take an engineering approach to general relativity, what I just showed can be understood. If you could change the space-time metric the way general relativity, I'm talking about textbook, not some fanciful physics, you could even get faster than light travel. Alcubierre warp drive as in Star Trek. Again, you might think that's a fanciful kind of thing, but that paper was published in one of the top general relativity journals, Classical and Quantum Gravity. The warp drive, hyperfast travel within general relativity. So if you engineer space-time metric, you can begin to line up observables with physics that we know and love, even if we can't reproduce it. What about the velocity of light constraint? People are always saying that. How could you have a wormhole that lets you go from one side of the universe to the other? Aren't you beating the speed of light? Well, what does a physicist or an engineer mean by the speed of light? He means this little equation here where the speed of light is given by 1 over the square root of the permittivity times the permeability of the vacuum. So the point is, if you re-engineer those vacuum parameters, then you can make the effective speed of light higher in the engineered region. And so those are the solution in general relativity that are called wormholes. And again, it's not science fiction. This is just right off the shelf, standard textbook general relativity applications. So what that means is a reduced time interstellar travel is not, as skeptics would say, you can't get from there to here. Advanced ET civilizations now or ourselves in the future are not fundamentally constrained by physical principles. The exotic physics for such can be addressed in engineering terms, sort of metric engineering, as it were. Does this have any help? Again, by the way, this paper also was published as one of the Defense Intelligence reference documents. And since we were permitted to publish in the open literature, I published that paper in a British Interplanetary Science Journal, an engineering journal. So if you're interested in looking at the details, you can learn as much as you want to know about metric engineering. And that helped us understand some of the aspects. I mean, you may have heard the phrase, dense stars, you get redshift. Well, it turns out in this engineered technology, you get so-called blue shift. That is, frequencies are upshifted to higher frequencies. So for example, in this room, most of the radiation coming off our bodies, off the walls, and so on, is in fact in the infrared. But we see things in the visible range. But what happens if you get into a volume of space where the vacuum has been engineered in the way I've been discussing? It turns out you get a blue shift. So in fact, the infrared that you don't ordinarily see can get blue shifted up into the visible, so it's not surprising that all these craft should be so luminous. Now the downside from all of this is the fact that visible light, which doesn't have any particularly harmful effects, gets blue shifted up into the ultraviolet, so if you get too close to a landed craft, you might get a sunburn, or off into the soft X-ray region, so the chance of radiation poisoning. So if you run across one of these sitting on the ground, I would recommend you don't, and it's powered up, I'd recommend you don't rush up. Well, that helped us to understand. As part of this program, we looked at some cases that were really good from Brazil, 77, 78. It was like Close Encounters of the Third Kind. 1,000 pages of documents, all done by the Brazilian Air Force investigative team. 500 photographs, 15 hours of motion film, a lot of medical injuries. I know you probably can't read that from here, but it's just a list of the different kinds of medical injuries that occurred when people encountered these craft at close range. And it has some overlap with cases that we've investigated during the program of injuries occurring. Well, despite the progress in the AATIP program, let's face it, the topic is inherently anomalous, right? Therefore, despite the reality of the observations and all the people that we interact with in the intelligence community and the Pentagon agree, the data's there, it's real. Nonetheless, the topic doesn't fit smoothly into known profiles of government programs, for sure. And by virtue of national security implications, it's high compartmentalization of the topic, therefore slow pace of cumulative progress and integration. We call them stovepipes. You have a lot of people with lots of detailed information about some particular aspect, but they don't talk to each other, even if it's sitting at the next desk. And let's face it, advocacy of the issue in government circles is not viewed as career enhancing. In part because, despite the weirdness of the subject, if you don't make a lot of progress, it doesn't look good on your resume that you're moving up the line. So because of that, there's a forward story. Many of us involved in the program decided that there should be an outreach program in the public sector. So this is the forward story. The goal was to establish a broad-based, high-quality scientific community of interest in the public sector concerning these unidentified aerial phenomena and other related leading-edge topics. And so we got together and formed a company called To the Stars Academy of Arts and Science. It was co-founded by entrepreneur Tom DeLong. I'll talk about him in a minute. Senior intelligence officers from the Department of Defense and CIA, and distinguished research scientists. We all banded together to form this academy. It was set up as a public benefit corporation, so the public can invest, and therefore it's owned by the public. So this is something new. Whatever comes out of any of the research or any of the release of information is actually going to be owned by the public. It's not going to disappear into a black hole. Very transparent structure. If you go to the website, you can see everything from the financial structure to the activities. And we do have a web-based community of interest where things get posted. For example, this F-18 FLIR tape I show, we now have 3 of them up there. Probably more to come. All right, well, who are the principals of this organization? Tom DeLong, Blink-182 rock star. Frankly, I'd never heard of Blink-182. But my son told me, oh yeah, we know about Blink-182. But anyway, in addition to being the rock star that he is, he's also director and producer, puts out books and music and film and so on. And he's had a lifelong interest in the UFO area. And so he started talking with various people, and he was kind of the, I guess you'd say, the action-oriented person who said, why don't we set up something? Why don't we make this more available to the public? And he got to a number of us, and so we all began to band together. Lou Elizondo, who was, in fact, the Department of Defense's, the Pentagon's AATIP program director, resigned from the Pentagon and joined us. Chris Mellon, 20-year career, Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense for Intelligence, Minority Staff Director of the Senate Select Committee on Intelligence. He joined us. We got Jim Simovan, 25-year career in CIA's Director of Operation. He was the real James Bond kind of guy. Steve Justice just retired as Program Director for the billion-dollar programs at Lockheed Martin Skunk Works. He joined us. And then I agreed to be on the board, so I joined them. In addition to my science and engineering background, I've had a lot of activity in classified areas, so it was a natural fit for me interacting with all these people. We also put together a policy and scientific advisory panel of the best people we could find. Chris Mellon agreed to be the chair. Dr. Colm Kelleher, he was actually the deputy administrator at Bigelow Aerospace to run the AATIP program out of the Pentagon. Dr. Gary Nolan, top genetics professor at Stanford University. Dr. Kahn, 30-year career with CIA, Counter-Biological Weapons Program. Dr. Rapp, professor of military and emergency medicine, Uniformed Services University. Dr. Gilpin, consultant in academic biomedical research and research law. So we put together a team as panelists to keep us on the straight and narrow of really top people who have wonderful backgrounds and really want to see scientific work be done in this area. So the goals for the To the Stars Academy are promote the concept that such forefront topics as UFOs, SETI, consciousness studies, even telepathy and psychokinesis should not be considered taboo for serious scientific consideration. So, I mean, it's a perfect match to the SSE, because that's our goal in the SSE as well. And of course, big idea is to generate funding to underwrite significant research in these areas, develop user-friendly databases so information that is generated can be accessed by anyone, provide positive support for collaborative government, aerospace industry, and academic efforts to accomplish all of the above. So we want to act as the glue in the public sector and create entertainment properties, books and documentaries and so on, so that whatever is learned can be delivered out to the public. The structure of the organization has a science structure, an aerospace structure, and an entertainment division. What are the activities of this organization to date? Actually, we were responsible for legitimizing the topic in the mainstream press. That story that came out in the New York Times and so on, which then got picked up by Washington Post, CNN, Fox News, was based on agreed upon interviews with those of us that I've just gone through a list of. And given the quality of the sources coming out from the shadows, for example, ex-Senate Majority Leader Harry Reid, top F-18 pilots, significant Department of Defense and intelligence community officials, the bar has been raised on legitimization of this topic in the public arena. We think that's an accomplished goal to date. And via the community of interest postings on the website, we now have 3 high-quality F-18 videotapes of unidentified aerial phenomena encounters. They've been previously languishing in the Pentagon servers, nobody doing that much with them. These are still being generated. One of the tapes is from 2016 off the East Coast of the United States. I mean, there are a lot more tapes. Hopefully we'll get a lot more of them posted. We don't just produce positive results, or what people would think would be supportive results. One of our science advisors is Gary Nolan from Stanford University, who's a genetics expert. And there had been claims that some small humanoid skeleton found in Chile, so-called Atacama humanoid, might be E.T. And you can see why somebody might think that if you see the structure. But anyway, Nolan and people from other universities put together a complete genetics thing and did the entire genome and found that, in fact, no, unfortunately, this is not evidence of E.T. It's a deformed human. And so that's up on the website if you want to read the paper. It was published in one of the top genetics journals, very well peer-reviewed. And meetings are being set up with people from other countries because other countries who also have materials don't necessarily want to give them to the US government because they disappear in a black hole and they never learn anything. But given our commitment as a public benefit corporation that that's not going to happen with us, they're now talking to us and we're collaborating on obtaining materials from foreign countries. And of course, we're negotiating with media outlets to get all this out in the public in the form of documentaries or TV shows or whatever. So basically, that's the backstory and the forward story. And I'm glad to answer any questions. I'll answer any that I can. Thank you.
Thank you for a terrific presentation. So your good friend John Alexander published a book, and I know I'll have a chance to ask him this too.
Mm-hmm.
Why was it so hard for him to find who was doing the research, who was holding the files on UFOs? In his book, he said everybody thought that somebody else was doing it, but everybody said in all the departments, it's not me, it's not us that are doing it.
It was somebody else doing it. And if materials are being held in special access programs, casual conversation, even with high-level people who know your interest and they're interested too, won't necessarily reveal the facts.
Well, I think Lou Elizondo even said his own boss wasn't quite sure what he was doing, so I don't know if that's true or not.
That's true.
Thank you. My name is Joe Bookman. I was part of the organizers of the 2015 Citizens Hearing, which was an attempt to bring the best of the evidence before 6 members of Congress. I don't know if you were aware of that. If you were, I'd be interested in your take on it. But my second question then would be, out of everything you said, I thought one of the most interesting things was there are a lot more tapes. Are those classified? And if not, or even if they are, can you characterize them in any way or tell us what might be about?
They're not a lot different from this, and some of them are classified because of where they were taken. But as far as the content of what we're interested in from a technical standpoint, they're not that different. And provided you strike out the, say, location and so on, then there's a chance of getting them declassified, and we're working on that.
Yeah, if that was a TV channel, I'd be quite likely to tune in. And then generally speaking, out of the whole world of the UFO field, or specifically regarding that citizens hearing from 5 years ago, is there anything you found useful, beneficial? I know there's a lot of hoaxerism and fraud involved in what's called human knowledge. Speak to that at all.
Well, you have to pick and choose among the data. I'm familiar with the citizens hearing and so on, and certainly the depositions by the individuals who were in the launch towers for missiles, who had Bob Salas, for example, that's all really good data. And so, and the FAA administrator who came forward, all good data.
Thank you.
Hey Hal, thanks very much for the talk. I wanted to bring up something in regards to the nature of the release, and I guess the figure was 22 million, as well as a program that was stated to be closed. I guess it's maybe a leap, but I think it's basically common knowledge amongst UFO researchers that the spending in actuality is in the billions, if not more. So some people in the UFO research community have, raised the question of, is this a wooden duck on the pond to state a figure so low as 22 million and then state that the program no longer exists. I was hoping that you might make some comments on the great deal of concern, I think, that has arisen from these statements. Thank you.
That's a fair concern. This $22 million program was one particular program. That doesn't say there weren't other programs with other funding levels. And so it isn't like suddenly there was this one program, it didn't last long, didn't have that much money, and it shut down. I mean, interest is continuing, negotiations are continuing, other programs are being looked at. So a lot is going on. I and my colleagues spend a lot of time in Washington talking to committees that are looking at this from many different angles. So the general view that, oh, well, there's just one program came forward, didn't provide much of value, and then it got canceled, that's not really the case. And also, those figures are associated with the figures that went out to contractors. But that doesn't mean that people within the system aren't still working on it.
All of us Maverick inventors working in our garages on metric engineering devices, is there going to be a clearinghouse for people to trade discoveries? Like just the thing about the frequency shift. Oh, we can all be looking for line shifts and lasers to see if we generate micro effects in that. But just something like that is incredibly valuable. But maybe there's a lot of other things like that.
Well, we have a Maverick Inventor program at EarthTech International, my organization, and also the To the Stars Academy is putting together a research organization. So if you're doing some metric engineering in your lab and you've got some lasers shifting in frequency, bring them on. We'll look at them.
Cool.
Okay.
Thank you very much, Hal.
Thank you.